CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Playing with fire. The European Union sends a warning to Poland as the country's highest court challenges the supremacy of EU law.
15%. The majority of the world's economies are poised to agree a landmark global tax deal.
A deadly blast rocks a mosque in Afghanistan during Friday prayers. ISIL claims responsibility.
British industry leaders seek government help to avoid factory closures amid rising gas prices.
And more than 500 million trips. China's tourism industry rebounds during the National Day holiday. Poland has been warned it's playing with fire after the country's top court challenged the supremacy of European Union law.
Poland's constitutional court found some EU laws are incompatible with the country's constitution. The ruling puts Warsaw on a collision course with the 27-member bloc and raises the possibility of a so-called Polexit.
All rulings by the European Court of Justice are binding on all member states' authorities, including national courts. EU law has primacy over national law, including constitutional provisions. This is what all EU member states have signed up to as members of the European Union. We will use all the powers that we have under the treaties to ensure this.
Let's talk to our correspondent Giles Gibson, who's in Brussels. Giles, Ursula von der Leyen has been saying this move is deeply disturbing. I mean, it does seem rather dramatic. I mean, what now for the European Commission?
Well, there's just no getting away from it. This ruling by the Constitutional Tribunal in Warsaw is a direct threat to one of the cornerstones of the European Union, and that is that EU law takes precedence over the national law of member states. So the European Commission certainly has to respond in some way, and while we have heard Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, saying that she's deeply concerned about this, she hasn't actually really laid out what the next steps are going to be. She simply said that this ruling will be analysed thoroughly and swiftly by the European Commission, the building behind me, and that they will then take next steps. Of course, this is just the latest flare-up in a long-running dispute between Warsaw and Brussels over the judicial system in Poland. And the EU is actually already withholding coronavirus recovery funds as a result of that months-long dispute. The next step for the European Commission and the European Union potentially is moving towards also suspending wider budget payments as well.
But Giles, are we looking here at Poland leaving the bloc? Is that a real possibility?
Well, this term Polexit has certainly become a bit of a buzzword here in Brussels over the last few hours, and in the corridors of power we've heard from the spokesperson of the European People's Party group in the European Parliament saying that the Law and Justice Party, that's part of the governing coalition in Poland, is taking the country on the road to Polexit, so on the road to leaving the European Union. However, if you hear from Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, he says that this is more about how the European Union actually treats his country. He said in a Facebook post that was published just after the ruling was announced on Thursday that we want a community of respect. There's also a little bit of breathing room for Poland and from the European Commission to consider what their next step is going to be. And that's because this ruling doesn't really take effect until it's officially published in official channels in Poland. So that gives both sides a bit of a chance just to consider whether they want to escalate this situation or not.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you for the update.
Well, Piotr Kaczynski is an Associate Research Fellow at the European Institute for European Policy, and he joins us live now from Warsaw. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. So Poland is really setting itself against the EU here. What do you think the EU is going to do about it?
Hi, it's good to be back. Listen, what the EU can do a lot. First of all, EU can withhold all the funds that are going towards Poland. And Poland has been #1 beneficiary of EU support for the last 17 years. There's billions of funds, billions of euros that have been transported to Poland, and right now it's all on hold. Not only the recovery package is on hold, but even the things like payments to farmers or payments to poorer regions in the country. So this is a massive instrument that the Commission and the Union has in its own hands.
So with all this money on the line, is Poland really prepared to make a stand over this?
It's ridiculous. It's like sleepwalking. This government is sleepwalking without knowing what it is truly doing, because you cannot undermine the European law as it has been made over the last 70 years and then say we are against Polexit, we want to remain members of the club, but we do not like the rules of the club that has been playing by those rules by 70 years, and now you want to change it from one day to the next. This is not going to look very well, and we have some heavy artillery coming towards Polish government this week.
So what are the implications for Poland here, the security implications, for example?
Oh, there's a massive security implications for Poland. Poland has been a country that is basing its security on two elements. One is this military security, that's NATO, and second is this civilian security, and that's EU membership. Entire Polish economy growth over the last 30 years, much longer than just 17 years of membership, is based on the fact that Poland has became a country that has been profiting of globalization, and being a big market within the wider European market is a massive benefit for this country and for this economy to grow over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, actually. So this has been a tremendous and very important stabilizer for Poland and Polish security.
Well, let me ask you how this might affect the EU then. Obviously, we've had the UK leaving with Brexit. If Poland then leaves, are we in a situation where this is the beginning of the end for the bloc?
Well, I wouldn't call it the beginning of the end of the bloc, because this is we are not there. But if Poland was to leave the European Union, then this is a massive throwback against the 2004 enlargement for all the Eastern European countries and Central European countries, because that Eastern enlargement would not be possible without Poland. And with Poland leaving, this could leave a big hole in the middle of the bloc. And this hole would be void, much bigger void. It would be much bigger void than what we have, for example, in Western Balkans today, which is geopolitical void with sometimes other forces stepping in or trying to step in. But Poland being such a void, that's an opening to some new radical developments in the region.
Piotr Kaczynski, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today.
Almost 140 countries, led by the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, have signed a historic deal on global tax.
It will require international companies to pay an extra $100 billion in corporate taxes and shift more of their tax bills to countries where they actually conduct their business. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. So, Ross, in the last few moments, we've heard that this deal has been done. What does it mean?
Yes, it's the greatest overhaul of the global tax system for 100 years. It has been going on for several years, these discussions, but they came to a head as suddenly it picked up pace in the summer when the G7 started talking about it seriously, signing off on a preliminary agreement. And now, today, here in Paris, we have had that news that the deal has been signed. The talks have been hosted just up the road from where we are here at the headquarters of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. And they really underscored two main reasons why the global community wanted to work towards getting this tax deal over the line. for greater harmonisation of fiscal policy across the global community and also trying to crack down on tax evasion. There are two main pillars to the plan that has been signed. The first one, to make sure that multinational enterprises, these MNEs, the companies that we often see named and shamed when it comes to discussions about trying to pay their fair share of tax, of firms like Facebook, Google, Apple and Amazon, making sure that they pay taxes where they operate and not just where they happen to have their headquarters, which might be in countries with low or no corporation tax. That is pillar or point number one. Pillar number two is to have agreed on a base rate of corporation tax to be 15%. And we have had some holdout countries. We can come on to that in a minute. But it seems now we have inched over the line. In fact, the French finance minister said a couple of days ago that we are just 1 millimetre away from reaching a deal. It seems now that we have had that global tax accord signed here in Paris today.
But as you say, it wasn't unanimous for a while. Some people were holding out. How did they get brought in line to sign this deal?
Well, the three main countries that were reluctant to sign the deal in terms of the European Union were Hungary, Estonia and Ireland. And yesterday we had Estonia and Ireland reluctantly agreeing to this deal because Ireland, for example, has a 12.5% corporation tax. It has used that low rate to be able to entice companies to come to Dublin. The European headquarters of Facebook and Google, for example, are in the Irish capital. And it has, successive Irish governments have said for many years that we need to have this low corporation tax to allow us to try to battle with other bigger economies. We are a small economy, we are a small nation, we need to use such fiscal policy to try to lure investment into Ireland so we can level the playing field. And the same went for Estonia as well. Hungary also had a low corporation tax rate of 9%, but it has managed to come in line. In fact, Hungary only agreed today, Friday, to sign up to this global tax deal.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you very much.
Tommaso Faccio is head of secretariat at the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation. That's a group campaigning for tax justice, and he joins us now from Nottingham in the United Kingdom. Thanks for coming on the programme. So we've just had the announcement. What will a global tax rate mean in practice?
A global tax rate in practice will mean that regardless of where multinational book their own profits, they will still pay a minimum level of tax as the deal just has been announced, 15%. That doesn't mean actually that that will be the maximum they will pay, and countries like the US, for example, are still planning to increase that rate. So 15% is what has been agreed to bring on board tax havens like Ireland.
Well, they wanted to include the word at least 15%, didn't they? And that was one of the sticking points. But in terms of getting those big companies, so your Facebooks, your BP, Shells, Apple, Amazons, to pay appropriate taxes in the jurisdictions they operate, does this really change anything?
Well, this will mean that multinationals start paying more taxes in the countries where the multinational are headquartered. So they will pay more tax in the US. German companies will pay more taxes in Germany. UK, British company will pay more taxes in Britain. What doesn't mean is that these US companies will pay a lot more taxes in the UK or in France. And for developing countries, and some of the countries that have not endorsed the agreement are developing countries, as far as we're aware, there's 136 out of 140. For them, there's little in this deal. And so this is a deal that's been driven by rich countries and will benefit overwhelmingly rich countries.
So if it benefits overwhelmingly the rich countries, what's that going to mean ultimately for the developing countries who have been saying up until now, certainly, that this deal, if it came about, will fall short of economies like theirs?
Well, we need to say that the policy or the principle of a minimum tax to stop tax avoidance by multinationals, the so-called race to the bottom in corporate tax rates, that is a positive thing in itself. But ultimately, these revenues need to be equitably shared, and for some of the countries in the global south, they see digital businesses trading there. And this deal will only affect the top 100 companies. And many of them do not actually trade in developing countries. There's some countries in Africa where only maybe 10 or 15 of the top 100 companies will trade there. So for them, this is a real issue. And this is why ultimately they're likely to implement unilateral measures, keep introducing digital services taxes, and look at the solutions that make sense for them.
Well, of course, they've agreed to it, but now it's got to go to all of those territories for ratification. So the story continues. Tommaso Faccio, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Chinese food delivery giant Meituan has been fined $530 million for antitrust violations, the second company to be penalised since Beijing's crackdown on monopolistic practices. The months-long investigation found the company guilty of forcing restaurants to sell food exclusively on its app. But the fine was much lower than expected, and far lower than Alibaba's penalty for similar antitrust abuses.
Data from Japan's Labour Ministry shows real wages rose for the second month in a row in August, up 0.2%. It's a welcome sign for the country's new Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, who has pledged to boost pay. But household spending was down 3% as coronavirus restrictions hampered consumption at restaurants and stores.
Starting salaries in the UK have reached their highest level since the 1990s. That's according to a new survey that will be studied by the Bank of England. The increase has been driven by widespread competition for staff amid a shortage of workers, from office-based jobs to food processing and logistics.
Tesla plans to quit California's Silicon Valley and move its headquarters to Texas, where it's building a massive car and battery complex. Chief Executive Elon Musk announced the move at the annual shareholders meeting in Austin. It follows Musk's high-profile spat with local politicians in California after they ordered the closure of Tesla's Fremont plant during the pandemic.
Still ahead on CGTN. Another month of disappointing growth for the US economy. Less than 200,000 new jobs added, far fewer than expected.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
A powerful explosion has torn through a mosque in the northern Afghan city of Kunduz during Friday prayers. Dozens of people have been killed and many injured. In the past half an hour, the Islamic State group has claimed responsibility.
European ministers are meeting in Luxembourg to discuss strengthening the EU's external border, including the screening and detaining of migrant arrivals. Much of the discussion will focus on Afghanistan. It comes as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees called on the bloc to take in more than 40,000 Afghans over the next 5 years. But the plea wasn't backed by EU countries.
People in the Czech Republic are casting their votes in a two-day election that's expected to be a tight race between Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and a group of opposition parties who have pledged to work together to oust him. The 67-year-old billionaire is hoping to win a second term despite criticism over his financial dealings and mishandling of the pandemic.
The UK is easing travel restrictions from next week, with 47 destinations removed from its red list, including South Africa, India and Brazil. Most fully vaccinated travellers will now only need to take a test once they're back in the UK. People arriving from 7 nations, all within South America and the Caribbean, will still have to undergo mandatory hotel quarantine.
An ash cloud from an erupting volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma has disrupted air traffic on the neighbouring island of Tenerife. Meanwhile, La Palma's airport was forced to cancel flights on Thursday after a new earthquake struck the island, causing more destruction. The earthquake, measuring 4.3 on the Richter scale, was followed by dozens of smaller tremors.
The French president is hosting a France-Africa summit in Montpellier, but no other world leaders have been invited. Instead, Emmanuel Macron is spending time with hundreds of young business people, artists and sports stars. The meeting comes at a delicate time for France and many of its former colonies, following a decision by Paris to cut visas for citizens of Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia.
187 people, including children and the elderly, have been rescued from armed gangs in Nigeria's northwestern Zamfara state. Nigerian officials carried out a security operation to find them after they were abducted from 4 local areas several weeks ago. Zamfara has been at the centre of violent kidnappings for ransom since December last year, with schools, villages and highways often targeted.
5 people have died in landslides caused by heavy rains in China's northern Shanxi province. Floods have destroyed houses and rescue work is underway. Officials have closed coal mines and suspended train services. Some 15,000 people have been evacuated from their homes.
Well, let's return now to the news that a powerful explosion has torn through a mosque in the northern Afghan city of Kunduz, and we can speak to our correspondent who is in Afghanistan, in Kabul. That's Zamarilai Abasin. So, Zamarilai, what's the latest?
Well, it was a deadly Friday after the 26th of August, where ISKP attacked the evacuees and killed hundreds and also injured the same number. Yet this is the second biggest and huge and bloody attack in Afghanistan in northern Kunduz province, where there is a mosque of Saidabad. It belongs to the Shiite Muslims of the country, and hundreds were gathered to pray the Friday afternoon around 2 p.m. prayers, when a suicide attacker enters the mosque and blows himself, and as a result, according to the information that I got from different sources, the locals told me the numbers are increased to 70 people killed and at least 140 more were injured, and most of them are in critical health condition, while most of the Kunduz hospitals are now busy admitting all these injured people. The ISKP, or the affiliates of ISI's Khorasan branch, has claimed responsibility and they said that they have killed or injured 300 people in the attack this afternoon. I have been also talking with Taliban Deputy Minister for Information and Culture, Zabiullah Mujahid. He told me that they condemned the attack, and also it's a infidel group of Daesh or the ISKP in Afghanistan that are committing such heinous crimes, and according to him, they will search them, find them and cultivate them. He also said that they are sure about the cultivation of the ISKP in the country. While many people, particularly in east and north of the country, after this deadly attacks are in total panic and they're concerned about their future in regard to the continuous attack by the ISKP. Now, this is a new, already accelerated saga in Afghanistan that the ISKP start brutal attacks in the country in various places, and now targeting every kind of people, particularly the Shiite Muslims of the country. That's the major claim of the ISKP, and that's why they believe they will fight against Taliban. The Taliban believe that they will cultivate them soon or later because they have no roots in Afghan society.
Samariullah Abisin in Kabul, thanks for updating us.
China has expressed grave concerns after US officials announced that one of their submarines hit an unknown object in the Asia-Pacific region. Reports suggest it happened in the South China Sea. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the United States withheld the information for days and urged it to disclose more details.
As the party involved, the US should clarify in detail the situation of the accident, including the location, the intention of the sailing, details of the accident, such as what exactly it collided with, whether it caused a nuclear leak, and whether it damaged the local marine environment. For a long time, the US has been engaging in provocative activities in the South China Sea in the name of exercising freedom of navigation. That's the root cause of this accident, and poses a grave threat and risk to regional peace and stability. The US should abandon its outdated Cold War-era zero-sum mentality, abandon the narrow-minded geopolitical concepts, and stop this wrongful approach that undermines regional peace, stability and development.
The US economy has added far fewer jobs in September than economists expected, as the pandemic continues to have an impact. Markets initially declined on the news, but have since recovered. CGTN's correspondent John Terretts in New York. John, this is the second month that jobs have stalled. It's rather underwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good word. I like that word. Actually, I think it's the third, because we had a big underwhelming April and a pretty underwhelming August, and now this is the worst month of the year so far, and it was a real shock. And I was watching one of the national television programs here to get the information, and there was a huge sort of sharp intake of breath when the economist who was reading out the numbers realized that it was so low. I mean, Wall Street had been telling us to look out for around 500,000 jobs added back on in the month of September, and in the end they got 194,000. So that is far, far, far fewer than had been anticipated. On the other hand, the unemployment rate went down to 4.8% from 5.2%, so that is good, but that could just mean that people are giving up looking for work. We don't know at this moment. Average earnings rising in September by 0.6%, so the president will like that. Now, I have to tell you, there were warning signs, because Wall Street did say look for 500,000 jobs in September, but there were comments around suggesting that actually things have been pretty sluggish at the back end of the summer and the early part of the fall here. And if you look at the number of leisure and hospitality jobs that were put on, just 74,000 for this entire country. And that's far fewer than we need to get things truly going again. And the education, there was a huge drop-off in local government and education jobs, more than well over 100,000 in each case. And that can only mean one thing. Either local authorities and schools have taken people on too soon, because the schools are mostly back now nationwide, more or less. They either took them on much earlier in the year, say June, July, I suppose even August, and so they don't appear this time round. Or the other alternative, I think, is that the school system and the local government system is so messed up by what's been going on for the best part of 2 years now because of COVID, that the number each time it's published is actually askew and not really accurate of what's going on. Now, the president was supposed to have spoken. I mean, all my monitors in here, we were expecting him about half an hour ago, and he hasn't. In fact, we were expecting him 2 hours ago, and he hasn't come up. And he's in a very difficult position because he owns this economy now. It's not President Trump's economy anymore. It is his. And he has to tell the American people that things will be okay. He's got rising inflation on the agenda. He's got his own battles with infrastructure. And, of course, there's the whole debt ceiling thing, which has gone away for now, but is going to come back in a couple of weeks' time. So I don't know what he's going to say, but he should have said it by now, and he hasn't. And that's an indication of they're probably trying to work out exactly how to word it.
Well, I'm going to word it as underwhelming again, because that's what I was going to ask you about what he had to say, because we are on the edge of our seats about what he's got to say. But maybe you can answer this instead. Where have all the workers gone, John?
Well, no, that's the big conundrum. I mean, that is literally the big question that economists are asking themselves. You know, Juliet and Robin, I don't think they know. I really don't, genuinely. There are 5 million fewer jobs than when the pandemic started, roughly February or March of last year. So there are 5 million people that we've yet to get back into the employment system. So where have they gone? Why are they not applying for jobs? I mean, I assume it's the COVID Delta variant that has crippled particularly the leisure industry. That would make sense. I suppose it's possible as well that schools have only just gone back, so parents are still adjusting. And then the benefits, the federal benefits, only ran out about a month ago. So this is possibly playing into all of this. But there are millions and millions of jobs available. So the final question for now is, what will the Federal Reserve do? It's talked about tapering the $120 billion it spends every month to prop up the economy. But now it's going to need even more information. So for that reason, I think what we have is the markets sold off initially on the news, but now they've realized tapering may be put off a little bit. And right now we're talking points only. The Dow is up 10 points, or was a few moments ago. NASDAQ is down 42 points. The S&P 500 is down by only 2 points, with energy the leading sector at the moment. So we now need to hear from Biden. Let's see what he says.
We certainly do. We need more information. Meanwhile, John Terrett in New York, thank you.
Still to come on CGTN, Spain's bank workers take to the streets amid job cuts and branch closures.
Billions of years of evolution on Earth. Different life forms sharing one planet, from single cells to complex ecosystems. They integrate, split, prosper, and perish. They affect our planet and are in turn affected by this diversified world of which humans are a part. It's time to build a shared future for all on Earth. Tune in to CGTN's special coverage on our global commitment to the planet.
This week on Razor, in a COP15 special, we'll take another look at those wonderful wandering elephants. And restoring seagrass, a home to thousands of marine species that absorb CO2 30 times faster than rainforests.
We scientists need to be actually out there trying to change things rather than studying the loss and the decline of these oceans that once supported us.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Playing with fire, the European Union sends a warning to Poland as the country's highest court challenges the supremacy of EU law. 15%, the majority of the world's economies have agreed a landmark deal on global corporate tax. And a deadly blast rocks a mosque in Afghanistan during Friday prayers, killing dozens. ISIL claims responsibility.
British industry leaders are holding talks with the government over the ongoing rise in energy costs. Gas prices in the UK have increased dramatically since the start of the year and reached an all-time record earlier this week. That's put pressure on heavy industry, which relies on gas to run its factories. Well, CGTN's Andrew Wilson has been following the meeting for us. So, Andrew, what do industry leaders want from these talks, and are they going to get it?
Well, it's a good question, actually. Grace Kwarteng, the business secretary, has got a lot to think about at the moment. His first issue is how to deal with the worries coming out of the business sector, of factories that are worried about being able to keep going because of the cost, first of all, of energy, and secondly, the supply. Are they actually going to have enough gas to be able to keep their plants going? So that's his first issue, but his second one, of course, is how to take this going forwards. But first of all, the business leaders will be talking to the business secretary and asking if there can be a possible bailout, a fund perhaps put aside to support them, perhaps the idea of a windfall tax to the public as well, some sort of emergency funding or support coming from the state. The government's unlikely to commit to anything like that at this stage because it'll want to know exactly what kind of a problem it's dealing with and how long it's going to go on for, because the reciprocal part of the government's comment to the industry will be, look, we might have to shut you down. They're saying at the moment there's no chance of that happening. It's very unlikely. We're not looking at what they don't like to call a winter of discontent, but they will be making provisional plans in terms of which plants would need to be shut down and for how long, to limit the use of gas in this country so that it can be pushed directly towards heating people's homes. That might mean 3-day weeks for some factories, cement and steel. It might mean 3-day weeks for shopping malls, which also consume a lot of energy. So these are other headaches the government's got to deal with. Now, this is just Kwesi Kwarteng, the business secretary, talking to industry leaders. Downing Street still worrying about petrol supplies and drivers and farmers and all the other lists that are building up at the moment as we go into winter in terms of different sectors facing different hiccups on their way to winter.
So altogether, not a very positive outlook, one might say. Is there any chance that this crisis will sort itself out?
Well, make no mistake, it's a completely worldwide issue. China is facing what it's now recognising as being a local and national energy crisis as well. Europe has got the same problem with soaring energy prices. India's prices have gone up by 63% in the last year. So there's all across the globe, there are issues of resupply going on and issues of prices going on that are causing ripples and problems in all different corners. That, to an extent, one would expect after the pandemic settles down a bit and the economy starts to grind into action again and get into more of a routine, one would expect it to settle down. But there's almost certainly a reckoning to come in terms of who gets first shout at the supplies that are available. Russia, thus far, has 2 major pipelines, one heading into, well, 2 actually heading into Europe, one heading into China. Those have been busy supplying those countries. There's also a fair amount of natural gas that comes out of Qatar and other Middle East producers that goes by ship, a lot of it to the Asian market, a lot of it to the UK, and the Americans also supply a lot of the Asian market as well as themselves. But the imbalances that have been created by various different problems in the last 12 months or so mean that there may be a different reshuffle about how that works. The Germans are already starting to rethink about whether or not they're going to allow, and they probably will now, a second pipeline to be opened up from Russia. China is now reconsidering whether or not it should start taking coal from Australia, which it wasn't doing before, and the UK will have to start thinking about how much it's prepared to pay Middle Eastern suppliers because they're getting better offers at the moment from the Asian market. So all that's got to be resolved before things calm down. The immediate worry for our government, our consumers here in the UK.
OK, Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
New research has found that Britain's top-listed businesses have too few women in senior leadership positions. Now, just 8 of the CEOs in the top 100 UK companies are women. Gosh, look at that. But the proportion of women in boardroom positions is at an all-time high, taking up 38% of the seats of FTSE 100 companies.
Spain's banking sector has suffered another devastating blow for its employees. News of a new bank merger this week has meant more redundancies and further branch closures. Many workers staged a protest in Madrid. CGTN's Rahul Pathak caught up with them.
It has been a week of bad news for Spanish bank workers. The merger of banks Unicaja and Liberbank has meant the closure of 400 offices and 1,500 job losses. It's the latest blow for an industry that has already suffered with closures and layoffs. 55-year-old Francisco Ramirez used to work for another of Spain's big banks, Banco Sabadell, who cut more than 1,900 posts last month. Francisco says he wants better severance conditions and a chance for his voice to be heard.
I'm here to protest for my rights, which I think are legitimate. They haven't thought about how much this would hurt people, and they had an opportunity to do this differently.
Catalan-based Banco Sabadell made similar cutbacks just 12 months prior, and others have also followed suit. Santander closed over 1,000 branches last December, with a loss of over 3,500 jobs. Banco Sabadell claims their failed merger with larger rival BBVA led investors to call for more drastic action and so had to act, prompting the redundancies.
Now, the pandemic forced many older and more traditional customers to begin online banking, thus reducing the need for that physical one-to-one presence that you get in an actual branch. And in fact, the first half of this year alone has seen the industry close around 10% of all of its branches, with more reductions expected.
The banking industry has also suffered from a climate of ultra-low interest rates. Traditionally, they earned money through lending, But now that source of income is drastically reduced. Many economic experts feel that this reorganisation was a change that was due, as Spain is second only to France in Europe with the most bank branches per person.
I think this is a global phenomenon. It's not only really happening in Spain, it's happening everywhere in the world. In some places it might happen faster or slower, and there might be another additional factors, but the truth is, yes, there's more online banking, and therefore there's less and less need for people really going to the branches of the physical branches of the banks.
Industry leaders have been lobbying politicians that the digitisation of the banking sector is both inevitable and positive. But for workers like Francisco Ramirez, who feels his prospects of re-employment in banking are limited, the feeling is quite different. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Newly elected Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has delivered his first policy speech since he took office on Monday. He insisted that ending Japan's COVID-19 crisis is a priority. Phoebe Amoroso reports from Tokyo.
Kishida's speech began by tackling Japan's most pressing domestic issue, the coronavirus pandemic, and how to restore some kind of normality after months of restrictions. He's promised to carry on pushing forward with the country's vaccination program, as well as offer third doses as booster shots to the population. But he's warned that Japan should be prepared for a worst-case scenario, and he's looking to secure additional medical resources for any kind of future crisis. The pandemic has really heavily hit Japan's economy, and how to restore it will be a top priority for the new government. In his speech, Kishida laid out his vision for new capitalism, one that promises a virtuous cycle of growth and distribution and will raise wages and expand the middle classes. To this end, he's looking to speed up digitalization as well as investment in new technologies and innovation. Green technologies in particular, Kishida said, will help spur economic growth as well as help Japan reach its very ambitious decarbonization goals. Finally, Kishida turned his attention to foreign policy, saying that Japan must work with like-minded allies to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. Japan, along with the US and other partners, have been trying to strengthen their cooperation in response to China's growing economic and military presence. However, Kishida struck a cautious tone in his speech, stressing the importance of maintaining dialogue with China and also the importance of Japan and China relations for the entire region and international community. First on the agenda, however, Japan is facing a general election, and Kishida must focus his energies on leading his party to victory. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
The tutoring industry in Thailand is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Many students are seeking extra help, particularly because of school closures during the pandemic.
It's been hailed as a solution to the country's education crisis, but some fear it could bring disparity to the classroom. Our correspondent Dusita Salka reports.
For many Thai students, like 17-year-old Virakan, the learning day does not end when the school bell rings. The bell just signals the start of another session of learning. Tutoring, shadow education, cram school, these classes usually go well into the night.
I feel that knowledge provided in school itself is not enough for the university entrance exam. The admissions test is so challenging and competitive. That's why almost all my friends need to take extra tutoring classes.
It's a routine he is used to. For him, tutoring started at the age of 8. He has his sights set to study medicine. To get into the course of his choice, he would need to compete with 300 students for 10 coveted spots. The pressure for today's students to excel has led to the growth of an industry that shadows formal education. It's a massive $300 million industry with more than 3,000 tutoring schools across the country. The common perception is that students need to attend tutoring schools like this one in order to pass the university admission exam.
From a modest beginning as a small cram school, this tutoring school kept growing in parallel with the pressing need for Thai students to seek courses outside of school. Now, with over 30,000 students per semester at 32 locations, this mini empire reflects the nature of the Thai education system, where students see tutoring not as a supplement, but as a necessity.
For more than 30 years, this centre has been at the realm of the country's tutoring boom. It gives students a leg up in the competitive scramble of modern Thailand. And even with the pandemic and lockdown, it did little to dent the demand as their enrollments increased.
I think the driving force for this kind of tutorial school will always be the same. It's competition. So as long as there is some kind of competition, there will always be people who try to find options that help them.
Options that could be harder to come by for families facing financial strain. The Thai Chamber of Commerce found that 52% of low-income families in Thailand borrow money for their children's education. And that was before COVID-19.
Post-COVID, there's definitely going to be demand for tutoring from financially sound families. But there are many families impacted by the pandemic that cannot afford the privilege of tutoring, so inequality will grow.
Many parents will see tutoring as the solution to learning losses brought on by school closures. But for every parent who can pay for tutoring, there are others who can't. And it will be those students that need it the most. Lucita Saogao, CGTN, Bangkok, Thailand.
Still to come on CGTN, we meet a team of research scientists working hard to protect the world's largest reef system.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. China's economic bounce back from the pandemic is well underway. Businesses in the country enjoyed a very profitable National Day holiday, which ended on Thursday. Tourism to China saw a strong rebound towards normality. The sector recorded 500 million visits during the holiday. That's 70% of pre-pandemic levels. Domestic holiday locations saw a boost as well. There was an enormous rise in duty-free spending in Hainan, where $230 million was spent. Meanwhile, at the movies, box office numbers were near record-breaking levels. Cinemas across the mainland saw revenues of $680 million. That's the highest turnover for the holiday since 2019.
Let's stay with China, and Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from the country. Here's a quick take on some of them. All that and more at CGTN.com.
The COP15 conference on biodiversity will finally get underway next week in virtual form. So this week on the agenda, Stephen Cole is looking at just what needs to be agreed online now and in person in Kunming in April next year. He spoke to Professor Alexandra Antonelli, Director of Science at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, about what it's really going to take to save life on Earth.
We all have to be playing a part in this. It's not only about politicians making decisions and then individuals going on their normal lifestyle. So we all have to see a transformation across all levels of society. It's about the consumer choices we make. Every day we go to the supermarket. What do we buy for food? Are we contributing to the deforestation of the Amazon or destruction of natural habitats? It's about what we buy in terms of furniture, in food. It's about the choice we make for our children in terms of pollutants and chemicals, pesticides. It's also about what's happening in our schools, in our councils, and the pressure we can exert on them. And then, of course, companies and the private sector can also lead change. And, of course, the political willingness and the framework by which people will be rewarded for doing the right thing and they'll be punished for doing the wrong thing. I really believe that the next 10 years, so this decade, and the decisions that will be made next year in China are possibly the last window of opportunity we have. I believe that if we don't act now, over the next few years, there won't be anything left, basically, and it will be too late. And we know that many ecosystems, they pass a threshold, a tipping point, after which they cannot revert. So this is really, I believe, our last chance.
And you can see more of that interview on The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
It's one of the 7 wonders of the natural world, but Australia's Great Barrier Reef remains under serious threat from coral bleaching caused by rising temperatures.
Greg Navarro has met a team of research scientists working to protect the world's largest reef system.
On a recent trip to the Great Barrier Reef, research scientist Lena Bay prepared for a dive. It's something she's done thousands of times before and still gets excited before plunging into the water.
You never quite know what you're going to see when you put your head under. But one thing that you can be sure of is that there's always going to be something that is beautiful and something that will surprise you.
Bay and a team of scientists from the Australian Institute of Marine Science collected corals from the reef and are putting them through a kind of stress test.
It's a bit like putting humans on a treadmill and running them as fast as they can to see how fit they are. So we do the same with temperature on the back of the boat.
Testing the fitness of corals here is important because the health of the Great Barrier Reef is failing due to climate change. It's believed the reef has lost more than half its corals since 1995. Scientists say warming ocean waters are causing more frequent mass bleaching events. That's when corals lose the algae inside of them that serves as a food source, leading to starvation and death.
What we are most concerned about is the frequency of disturbance that the reef has been experiencing for the last 10-15 years. You're just not giving the reef enough time to recover.
The loss of reefs wouldn't just impact the vast amount of marine life they support, but also the people who have come to depend on them. Australia's Great Barrier Reef helps to generate billions of dollars a year and employs tens of thousands of people. One thing is clear to scientists at the moment, and that's regardless of whatever steps we take immediately to address climate change, they say our oceans will continue to warm before we realize any benefits. So Bay and other researchers are focused on finding ways to help reefs better withstand the impacts from a warming planet. The key may lie within the corals that somehow manage to survive when exposed to warmer water.
So what our work is really focused on is identifying those tolerant individuals and finding out why they're more tolerant than others.
Scientists are selectively breeding these heat-tolerant corals and using genetics to help populations adapt to more extreme conditions. Despite this sense of urgency, Bay views her role as a privilege.
They are incredibly fascinating places. The biodiversity is out of this world, and the complexity of a coral animal is just incredible. And so there's always more to learn, and we're never quite done.
Which is why she says it's so important to do everything possible to help these corals survive now and into the future. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Meat eating in the UK has dropped by 17% over the past decade. Vegan, vegetarian and pescatarian diets are becoming more popular as consumers try to reduce their carbon footprint.
But more sustainable solutions are needed as the world's population continues to grow. And one family in Devon believe they have a possible solution: mussel farming. Razor's Joe Colan went to find out more.
Feeding the world's ever-increasing population is a growing challenge.
pushing the limits of what the planet can sustain. By 2050, the demand for food will be 70 to 100% higher, and new sustainable ways are needed to supply the world's population. I'm in Devon to meet a family of mussel farmers who believe they have part of the answer. Brixham is one of the UK's largest fishing ports and home to innovative family company Offshore Shellfish. Company founders John and Nikki Homeyard have been growing mussels for over 30 years. Rope culture mussel farms cultivate mussels on long lines of rope suspended underwater. Using no land, fresh water or pesticides, this process is recommended as a super green option in the Marine Conservation Society's UK Good Fish Guide.
Sarah was 2, I think, when we started it. 5, sorry. You're older than I thought, yeah.
And what was it about this particular area that made this ideal?
It's got the right temperature range. Where we are in Lyme Bay here, we're around about the boundary of where the water coming down the English Channel meets the water coming up from the Atlantic. And where you get that zone of mixing, you often get very good growth of plankton there. The plankton is actually vital for us because that's what the mussels feed on.
As we arrive at the 6-square-kilometre farm, John is keen to check on the progress of last year's lines, now becoming ready to harvest.
They'll throw a hook out, catch hold of the head rope and then winch it up to the surface, and then it gets put on these wheels.
John's specially designed floats suspend the ropes near to the surface of the water. This helps the mussels to hold on, reacting to the movement of the waves to create more byssus.
Well, these are the mussels as they come straight off the lines. You can see some clumps of hairy stuff here. Well, this is the byssus, or the byssus, which are the threads that they attach themselves to the ropes.
Mussels are filter feeders, so we don't add anything to them whatsoever. We put the lines in the water and all their food they take from the ocean, so from the algae and from the microplankton. And because the lines are so spread out, there's a lot of flow through of nutrients here. So Sarah, why are you such a fan of mussels? What's so good about them? Well, in terms of eating, you can't really eat anything much healthier. And in terms of being environmentally friendly, shells are made of carbon, so that carbon comes from the atmosphere and is absorbed. Yeah. And then that's never released again, so they act as a carbon sink. Mussels capture and trap carbon as their shells grow through a process known as biomineralization. Not only is this great for marine ecosystems, but when compared to other sources of protein, their carbon footprint doesn't get any better. In the theme of sustainability and growing world population and needing to kind of have sustainable solutions to how we feed a growing population, do you think rope-cultured mussel farming could be one of those answers?
Well, if you look at the productivity here, we can produce an awful lot of high-quality protein. This is high-quality seafood with no inputs. One of the most satisfying things about what we do is seeing when a truckload of mussels goes off, that is 30 or 40,000 meals in one truck. And I can do that sort of every day when we're harvesting. There's an awful lot of stuff called sustainable. The true meaning of sustainable is you can keep doing it, and you can keep doing it more and more and more, and you're still having no harm on anything, you know? That's sustainable.
Raiser's Joe Colan reporting there.
And finally, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but Japan's Yoshioki Noshita is living proof that that's not true. The 81-year-old's been learning how to skateboard at his local park in Osaka. He's even mastered 180-degree turns. He picked up his board at a second-hand market 2 years ago and been learning tricks from skaters decades younger than him. Kinoshita says the key is to practice 5 or 6 times a week, which helps keep his body and mind feeling young.
Our headlines again. Playing with fire. The European Union sends a warning to Poland as the country's highest court challenges the supremacy of EU law.
15%. The majority of the world's economies have agreed a landmark deal on global corporate tax.
And a deadly blast rocks a mosque in Afghanistan during Friday prayers, killing dozens. ISIL claims responsibility.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.